Hello, world historians. We're going to be talking now about medieval world travelers, and two in particular. The first of which is up on the screen right now, Marco Polo. The second is a Arab traveler who is much less well known, at least in the West, than Marco Polo. A guy called Ibn Battuta. Now, Ibn Battuta is believed traveled further than any other human being on the planet since the time before the arrival of the steam engine in the 19th century, before the Industrial Revolution. But Marco Polo is perhaps better known, at least in the United States, as having been the Italian who traveled to China during the 13th century, met with Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, founder of the Mongol dynasty, and also helped stimulate, I think, the curiosity about Asia, which led indirectly or contributed towards the movement that you see with Columbus in the 1490s traveling across the Atlantic to try and reach Asia, and the growth of intelligence, commercial intelligence about these global trade routes. But it's important to recognize that this is, a long period of history we're talking about here, and the main routes along which Marco Polo traveled, at least going east to China, were the Silk Roads. And we have to remember that the Silk Roads at this time were, of course, still very dangerous. They were still very physically challenging, cut through some extreme terrains, extreme climates. But relatively speaking, this was a period of great peace and stability within Eurasia, within the Silk Road regions. And this perhaps is a little bit surprising when we consider that this is the age of the Mongol Empire. But we also have to remember that the Mongols, although they have this perhaps well-deserved reputation for military ferocity, were also empire builders, and very successful empire builders. In fact, by that stage they developed the world's largest empire in world history, stretching all the way from Korea to Eastern Europe. So for the Mongols it was important that there was peace, that there was stability within the empire, because of course that equals trade, it equals commerce, and that means more taxes for the government, which is always one of the key organizing principles of any empire. So Marco Polo's great significance, if you like, was as an illustration to the Western world of both the wealth and the prosperity of China and the Mongol territories in between. But also, from a historian, it helps us to understand the system of diplomacy, of trade networks. The fact that, for example, Marco Polo, who was issued a diplomatic passport, was able to travel essentially the entire length of Asia without being harassed by bandits or by Mongol warlords, because they all recognized the seal of the government. So this is, again, something which lasts through the 13th century, but will eventually, in the following century, this kind of Eurasian unity under the Mongol Empire will eventually be destroyed, not by human agency or human intervention, but actually by biological catastrophe, namely the Black Death. So we're going to move very quickly on to discuss our next explorer, or traveler I should say, the guy called Ibn Battuta, or to give him his full name, Abu Abdallah Muhammad ibn Abdallah ibn Battuta, who was born to the Luwata tribe of Tangiers in modern-day Morocco. And as you're probably realizing, the name is more of a family tree than what we would think of as a personal name today. But again, this guy traveled further than any human being in recorded history before the Industrial Age. He traveled, I think, over 70,000 miles during his lifetime, which, to put it into some kind of perspective, that's more miles than I have on my car, and I've had my car for several years. Ibn Battuta lived in an age where there was no form of transport faster than a sailboat or a camel. So why does this guy travel so far through the world? There are a number of reasons, some of which I've tried to outline here. And I think it's important to recognize that even though we think of the medieval period, particularly in the West, as being a time of great, staticness in people's lives, that people didn't tend to voyage far beyond the village where they were born, that their geographical frame of reference tended to be very narrow, there was also great possibility for travel in the medieval world, particularly through some of these commercial routes, not just the Silk Road, but also through some of these sea routes that we've looked at, leading down to, for example, the Swahili coast. And this was particularly true of the Muslim world, where you have this concept of the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, which becomes particularly important after the fall of the Caliphate. The Caliphate is destroyed in Baghdad by the Mongols, in fact by the same Mongols that Marco Polo would have met on his travels in 1258. And after that time, Islam itself becomes a decentralized religion. There's no longer a political center of power, but what you have emerging in its place is this sense of a diaspora. And within that diaspora, there's a great deal of mobility, a great deal of travel, particularly for someone like Ibn Battuta, who grew up in a family of educated scholars, people who were known in the Sunni tradition as the ulama, or those who have knowledge. And these people were, basically hereditary scholars, but they were also in great demand, because you have to remember as well, within the House of Islam, within the Islamic world, although there's great cultural and religious or linguistic diversity, you have the central importance of the scriptures, particularly the Quran, but also the commentaries of the Quran, the kind of legal interpretations. And you have the importance of the Arabic language. So as a native Arabic speaker, as someone who was trained in the law from a young age, Ibn Battuta had a natural, if you like, marketability within the Islamic world, because the Islamic world was expanding so fast that it was creating this great demand for Islamic scholars, people who could work in a practical context as interpreters of the law for regions, particularly of the Islamic world, which were only recently coming under the Islamic faith. So Battuta becomes then a qadi, or a kind of traveling circuit judge, and he travels again this remarkable itinerary around the world. This is one of the reasons that he travels. Another is the fact that Ibn Battuta himself espoused the Sufi form of Islamic mysticism, which the Strayer talks about a little bit in his textbook, which in many ways was actually critical of mainstream Islam, but also had this culture of holy men, discipleship, that these Sufi mystics would go around the world trying to attach themselves to teachers, trying to learn spiritual enlightenment, and along with these teachers, there were also associated shrines or holy sites, which became itineraries along the pilgrimage routes of the Sufi Muslim world. And this, of course, is a supplement to the central pilgrimage of Islam, the Hajj, which is a reason that Ibn Battuta left home in the first place, was to go on the Hajj. And here we see again on the right an oil painting from Persia, which is from roughly actually the period of a little bit after Ibn Battuta's time. But you can see here, even though this is a Persian illustration, you can see the ethnic and cultural diversity that the artist was trying to capture here. You can see, for example, sub-Saharan Africans, Arabs, people from India, people from Persia, all congregating on the great shrine of the Kaaba in the center of Mecca. And even at this early stage of Islamic development, you have this kind of ecumenical gathering of Sunnis and Shiites who are able to put aside their differences to come together in the pilgrimage of the Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So again, this is a map showing the travels of Ibn Battuta just during the period of the Mongol Empire, which was actually split into several smaller administrative groups, because it was so huge, of course, at that time, that it was difficult to administer as a single unit. But this also illustrates the fact that the Mongols were very skilled administrators, that they were able to recognize these different cultural regions around which they could sort of organize their empire. So you have the Ilkhanate of Eastern, or the Western Mongol Empire, sorry, which was basically the old Persian Empire. You have the Empire of the Great Khan, Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis, who founds his capital eventually in Beijing, and this is basically Yuan Dynasty China. You also have in the north the Khanate of the Golden Horde, stretching all the way into modern-day Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and then in the center you have what was called the Chagatai Khanate, which included some of the regions of the Silk Road, which today would be considered perhaps, you know, sort of obscure Central Asian regions like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, but which in a time were both extremely important economically to the Silk Road, but were also extremely urban. And this is something, again, that we don't tend to associate with the origins of the Mongols as you know, kind of nomadic warriors, but they actually established some important cities, including the city of Samarkand in Central Asia. So they were not just the sackers and the invaders of cities, but they're also the builders of cities. And during Ibn Battuta's travels, he gets to see, you know, the basically the inner workings of the Mongol Empire that Marco Polo had visited about 100 years previously. He also returns via the sea. By the time he actually gets back to Morocco around the 1340s, he's actually being overtaken by this great ecological, biological, medical catastrophe of the Black Death, which sweeps over him in his wake. And by the time he returns to his hometown of Tangier in Morocco, he discovers that about half of his family had been killed by the bubonic plague. And this is also what eventually destroys the central unity of the Mongol Empire, because this was an economic foundation of the Silk Road. And of course, the consequence of the Silk Road was not just that globalization leads to the accelerated spread of diseases such as the Black Death, but also it destroys the infrastructure along the route. So no longer are people willing to undertake the physical risks involved with long-distance overland travel. And so economic activity switches to the sea, to the oceans, and eventually to the discovery by Europeans of the New World in 1492. So just to conclude then, Ibn Battuta, again, we don't really have the space in this short video cast to do justice to the extremely colourful and interesting life that this figure led during his time as an Islamic traveller. But it's important to recognize that he plays an important role in laying down the seeds of Islamic civilization in such far-flung places as the Maldive Islands in the Indian Ocean, the Sultanate of Delhi, which was part of the early or later Mongol Empire, and parts of North Africa, including the Kingdom of Mali, which was connected via the Sahara trade route to Ibn Battuta's homeland of Morocco. So it's true to say, I think, that he thought of himself, conceived of himself, primarily as a citizen of the world, but specifically as a citizen of the Islamic world. And this is again the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam. And so you have within the House of Islam this growing sense of Islamic identity. And it encompasses both regions where the population has largely converted to Islam, but also regions such as the Maldives, where the population has recently experienced a change of government, where the government or the elites have identified as Islamic, but you still have a kind of tension between the popular religion, perhaps, and the government of Islam, and this led to some interesting, cultural tensions for people like Ibn Battuta, who were actually groomed and raised within the traditions of Sharia law. But it gives you a good sense then of the importance of Islam as a cosmopolitan religion that enabled someone like Ibn Battuta to travel so extensively. So we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the Mongol Empire next time. Okay.